Hi, I'm Steve Myers, candidate for mayor of Baton Rouge. Welcome to another Myers Message as we wind down to the November 6th election. Today's message we call the assessment gap. As I've traveled through the parish during the campaign, I've found out how little a lot of us know about the operation of local government, particularly as regarding how it affects the revenue and the expenses. At night, one of the more enjoyable things I get to do is to go through the operating budget of the city parish, all 513 pages. It's actually an excellent book. We have an excellent finance department in Baton Rouge, and this budget actually was awarded from the Government Finance Offices of America a Outstanding Presentation Award for 2011. Now, their job is, of course, to provide the numbers. Behind each number is a story, and each story contains people. So it's not just facts and figures. We have to remember that a government and a budget concerns people. Not just government workers, but also the people in the parish that it affects. Someone is affected by every cent that's in the government, in the budget. But we as ordinary citizens are often not very knowledgeable about how we get our revenue and then how it is distributed and appropriated. And if we don't know what's going on, we are subject and bound to be bamboozled. One of the areas that I didn't get to on the messages was one that we call a required course. And what I'd hoped to do was to present a plan to actually have, in addition to civics, or a module where high school seniors would actually learn about how local government operates. We know about the federal government, we often get something on state government, but we very seldom, even in law school, study the ins and outs of local government, and that's where a lot of us are affected. What I'm hoping is that when elected, we can actually use some of the public broadcasting areas instead of presenting a lot of the political stuff that's going on in the districts, where maybe we can form some sort of course or module that we can use on Cox Cable in order to try to inform the voters in a little bit more detail about how their government actually operates. One of the prime areas of concerns is assessments. And while I'm not running for assessor, and I understand that the assessor is a different constitutional office and the mayor doesn't have control over the assessor's office, the fact of the matter is that what the assessor does affects the mayor, because the money that is obtained through the assessor's office goes to run our schools, our fire department, our police department, our general government. I found that while overall gross assessments have risen in East Baton Rouge Parish, I think they're close to $4 billion in assessed value now, that in certain pockets of town there are really some discrepancies, especially in residential properties in some of the areas of town where people don't often buy and sell houses. They may hold on to their property a little longer, and that would be areas like South Downs, South Side area, University Gardens, Magnolia Ridge along Lakeshore Drive, Garden District, many of the areas around LSU. But before we get into the problems that I find, I've found that it's shocking how many people don't know how assessments work. So first, I would encourage you to go to our assessor's website. It's actually a pretty good website in explaining how assessments work. When you hear the word millage, you should know what it means. And while assessments can get complicated, for residential purposes, they're actually pretty simple. The Constitution of Louisiana says that your residence should be assessed at roughly 10% of market value. So a $250,000 house would have a $25,000 assessment. Then the millages are applied. A mill is 1/10 of a cent, or a percent, or 1/1000th of a dollar. Currently in East Baton Rouge, there are 50 mills roughly of parish-wide property tax. Everybody in the parish has a 50 mill tax, of a combination of various taxes. Then you add school taxes to that. In East Baton Rouge, that's roughly 42 mills. Now, I noted that Zachary has a 79 mill property tax, almost 1.5 times. I don't know if that has any impact at all on the fact that Zachary schools are rated constantly higher than East Baton Rouge schools, whether it has something to do with money or not, but it's a thought. But I digress. Then there's about 9 fire districts in the parish. The average millage on those districts is 15 mills, although it's a wide range from 9 to 40 mills. So depending on where you live in the parish, you're going to pay 9 up to 40 mills of tax for fire protection. This is another area that I wonder about, and people have asked that why can't it be consolidated into one fire district with everyone paying the same amount of tax. Don't have time to get into that on this message. Then you have special tax districts like CATS, the Transportation District, and the Downtown Development District. And finally, you have actually the city taxes. In East Baton Rouge city limits, you have 13.42 mills of city tax, which goes to the general operating budget as well as a fire retirement system millage. Because all of these millages and taxing districts are spread throughout the parish, I think that's one reason to actually look at annexation, which we've discussed in previous messages. But for our purposes today, you'll pay a different millage depending on where you are in the parish. And in the city of Baton Rouge, that millage is roughly 108 to 110 mills, something along those lines. I mentioned that a mill is 1/10 of a cent or 1/1000th of a dollar. So to calculate your property tax, and of course the sheriff has done a great job recently in putting all of these different mills on the back of your property tax bill, which you should receive in the next month. But if you want to know, just in the noggin here, how much should your tax be, take what you think your property is worth and multiply it by 1%. Or another way to do it is take what your property is worth, take 10% of that, then multiply it by the millage and divide by 1,000. I like the first method better, multiplying by 1.1%, because it gives you the market value. It gives you roughly what your property tax would be. If you have a homestead exemption, that figure can then be reduced by $750 roughly. For the math challenge, the calculations can get sticky, but the point I want to make is that you have to know all this background or you can't understand what the problems are. Now there are 3 factors to note when it comes to these assessments. One, your tax is determined by the amount of millage. When we pass a new tax, that's a property tax, it's going to be some millage. That's the actual tax rate. Secondly, where you live within the parish has some effect. If you live in the city, you're going to pay 13 mills more in tax than someone that lives in the parish often. Again, that depends on what the fire district tax is and the other special taxing districts that you live in. Again, an argument for consolidation so we can all be on one page. What I did note in the budget is that the city parish notes that when one mill brings in roughly 1.49 million on a city tax. On a parish tax, one millage brings in 2.96 million. So there's roughly a $1.5 million gap between the amount of tax brought in on a parish-wide millage and a millage that's just in the city parish. Now, if everybody outside the city limits were paying the same millage as the people inside the city limits, that would be 13.42 mills additional. Now you multiply that by the $1.5 million gap, and that brings you up to almost $20 million in additional revenue should we take the city limits and annex to the parish lines. I'm told that this is enough to pay for the $20 million problem that would arise if we tried to consolidate the police, the sheriff, and the constable and public service offices, because we have a lot of issues with retirement funds and where's the money going to come from. Here's one idea that needs to be further studied. The third and major underrated factor in how much money the city gets is the determination of the assessed value. Every 4 years, the assessor is directed by the Constitution to reassess. That is, to determine what the values of the properties are. That is the base amount to which the millage is applied. Now, if you notice an increase or decrease next month in the amount of your property tax bill, it's not necessarily because the millages went up. It may be because the value of your property was deemed to be higher and has gone up. Assessments are difficult. I've talked with the assessor about this, and we're going to talk further after I get elected. But 2 houses right next to each other could have different assessments because it depends a lot on their value, which depends a lot on the condition of the house, the square footage, and that sort of thing. But I have noticed that in some areas of town, as I mentioned, assessments seem to be 20 to 25% below what market value is. As a real estate broker, I know in some areas of town some of these property values very well, and I look at them and I can't help but but notice that the property tax bills just simply do not line up with the market value. Now, I have some examples here from areas like South Downs and University Gardens. This is all public information, so it's all available on the website. There's a fellow named St. Amant on Hyacinth who has an assessed value of $19,780, which is roughly $197,000 property value, and I know for a fact that this house is worth well more than $197,000. There's a Coke on Cherrydale, $218,000 value, house clearly worth more than $218,000. A Crawford on Cherrydale, same thing, $220,000 value, clearly a higher property house. Here's one at Bardwell on Hyacinth. I mean, I could go through this. Here's a Blackstone on Lakeshore, $502,000 value, and the house was recently listed on the market for over, I believe, $1 million. So here's one, a Knockan on Morning Glory, a property value of $106,000 for a property that he self-proclaimed to be worth over $250,000. Now, what I find when I examine over 100 properties in these areas is that the pattern may not hold through the entire parish, but it certainly holds in some of these areas. Now, the assessor notes that he simply does not have the manpower to send an assessor out to assess or appraise 200,000 homes in Baton Rouge every 4 years. They just don't have the manpower. So they use formulas and matrices in order to determine what the assessed value would be, and then they apply it based on the information in their database. Now look, I will be greatly affected by bringing these values into line with the market value because I own property in these areas. And I do believe we have a spending problem in East Baton Rouge as much as we have a revenue problem. But I also believe in honest government. And by this I don't mean allegations of corruption or fraud. I mean that the same rules should apply to everyone. And that a property that is supposed to be valued at 10% of its market value should be valued at 10% of its market value. The politically powerful pitchfork crowd in South Downs and University Gardens and along Lakeshore Drive should not be paying less taxes than the poor person who's living in the middle of the inner city. It just is not right. I know this is a long message and it's overly simplistic to some and overly complicated to others, but the point is that we can talk all we want about grandiose plans for East Baton Rouge Parish, but I believe it begins with sweating the small stuff. And the fact is that nothing affects the operation of government more than the money it gets, and nothing affects the money it gets more than the assessed value of the property. That, along with the millage rate, creates a potential gap that could help us stop ever having a future tax if the assessed values were lined up. Now, I don't know to what degree this is a serious problem, but I know it's a serious problem in some neighborhoods. And we need much more attention to this problem, not just by the elected leaders, but by us, the citizens of the parish, because this is inequity that really needs to be resolved. Now, we can make Baton Rouge a nice place for everyone to live, but we all have to carry our weight and do our part. We can make it happen if we make it Myers.